wonderful weekend. As I said, the topic today is freedom from the past. I'm grateful to all of you who have made time to join us for this Sunday webinar. And once again, as I said, I'm aware that everyone here has had their own journey in dealing with the past, in transcending it, in overcoming it, and struggling with it. And the fact that I'm talking about it today is not intended to imply any assumption of competence on my part. It is just that as a teacher, I'm very excited to be sharing things that I have come across, I have experienced, and I have read, and it is in that spirit. So I want to begin by raising the question, is it ever possible to complete the past? And sometimes we think about completing the past, and for each one of you to think through, what would that look like for you in your life if you were to think about completing the past, the unfinished business of the past? What would it look like? And for each of us, it might look very different. So that brings me to another point I decided I had not emphasized enough during these webinars. Sometimes webinars are given by experts who have a solution, and you listen to the webinar in order to be able to journey and enact that solution. The webinars that I do are not intended to be problem solvers. They're just a place where we are reminded of some fundamental truths that we might have forgotten in the busyness of our lives, in the insanity of everyday living. These are just opportunities for you to even to listen so that you are supported in your journey at developing your own approaches. You know, not something that I'm here to share, but hopefully that it'll spark something in you and strengthen your own creativity and your journey towards developing homegrown approaches, to attend to your own spiritual, emotional, and social needs. So do ponder the question, what would it look like for you to complete your own past? And the Gestalt psychologists used to use the phrase, the unfinished baggage of childhood, to imply that often there are leftover pieces from our childhood that haven't been fully processed that tend to come up and shape how we show up on an everyday basis. Now, I want to make it clear that some of the leftover pieces from our childhood could involve trauma and other painful experiences. This session is not intended to deal with that level of trauma or pain. We are dealing more with the everyday experiences of individuals, as they're trying to navigate the challenges. And I know that there might be other issues for which a qualified mental health professional is somebody who would be able to support you better. So one of the challenges is that the past never really remains the past. So the moment we start ruminating about it, we have brought it into the present. So I'm thinking of my childhood sitting here in front of you. The moment I start sharing stories from my childhood, the feelings come back, the thoughts come back, and what was in the past is in the present. And the future is always born out of the seed of the present. It's the present is the seed, and the future comes out of this. So the moment something from the past has come into the present, the future is going to be created out of that seed that is in the present. In this sense, there is no discontinuity. The past comes into the present and then becomes the future. And therefore, often much of what we think we have experienced and the interpretations and stories that we have made up from our experiences end up getting recycled. They come from the past into the present, and then they're immediately moved into the future as well. So if one of the aspects about freedom from the past is, I don't want the term freedom from the past to imply some sort of a struggle of I have to get free from the past. Let me start wrestling with it. Because as we all know, anything that we fight with only becomes stronger. For those of you who attended my live seminars before the pre-COVID days, you know that I would go up to somebody in the audience and start pushing against them. And they would start pushing back. And it was done as a Zen experiment to demonstrate how anything that you resist shall persist. And so it is with our past. If we have a past that we fear, that we have not processed, that we have not integrated, we start resisting it, pushing against it, fighting it. And anything that you push against will push back, and we become even more trapped in the shell of the past. And therefore, the And often the ways in which we import the past into the present, we sometimes break up in a relationship and say, my new relationship will not be anything like the one I had in the past. It'll be totally different. My new job, I'm determined, will not be anything like the one I had in the past. My previous job, it'll be different. The moment I say this new thing will not be anything like I experienced in the previous, notice how I have brought the previous into the present. So these are some of the ways in which, even without our knowing, we are smuggling the past into the present. We say we want to transcend it, but in some ways, like a teddy bear that you were fond of clinging to when you were a child, we are clinging to the comfort of our own past. In one of the seminars that I attended, they invoked the metaphor of three levels of filing cabinets. You know, a filing cabinet with multiple drawers. One is called the past, one is called the present, and one is called the future. You would expect that the filing system is working appropriately. And then if you open the past, the drawer that's labeled the past, you'll see things about the past. If you open the drawer that's labeled present, you'll see things about the present. And if you open the drawer that's labeled the future, you'll think about the future. That would happen in an ideal world. But as we know, I open the drawer that is labeled the future, thinking I'm going to create out of nothing, out of, create a future. I open the drawer and I notice that there are many, many files that were supposed to be put in the past drawer that have now been misfiled into the future drawer. So even though I'm thinking I'm looking at the future, I'm really looking at files from my past that have been misfiled into the drawer that says the future. And in this way, many of you can relate to it. In creating a future, we are sometimes prisoners of the past. Do we start resisting it? The resistance is going to only compound the problem. Most of the Eastern wisdom traditions would say awareness is the golden key. Just to become deeply aware of the ways in which how I'm showing up today is just a continuity of the past, to be aware of it. When we become aware of something, we sometimes transcend it automatically. When we try to fight it, we just become victims of it all over again. Now, to me, one of the greatest challenges of the past, and this came to me in the last week, is that just like with everything else, we think we know. And we think we know our past. Obviously, because I have lived and experienced it, so I know what happened in my past and I know it so well. And this false sense of security of knowing what our past is keeps us from appreciating the past as a mystery. Perhaps we have developed some narratives about the past. Perhaps we have developed some narratives about our parents and our brothers that seem so true in those moments. But are those narratives necessarily true? Or was it things that are chattering monkeys, the voice inside our head, which is constantly making up stories and interpretations? Were these the interpretations that we made up? I have made up interpretations about my brothers, my mother, my father, and I stand in a relationship to these interpretations as if those interpretations represent the truth. So perhaps a shift that we need to do in order for a process of thawing to begin, for our crystallized structures to start melting slowly, is to start embracing the past as a mystery to be rediscovered. Maybe if I were to embrace the past as a mystery to be rediscovered, I would be able to see something new and a whole set of possibilities would show up. Usually, what we do is we have some elements of the past which we have decorated, which were ideal. We all think about those great days, which even led Mary Hopkins to sing, "Those were the days, my friend, we thought they'd never end. We'd sing and dance forever and a day." Nobody guessed that you would be hearing Mary Hopkins sung in an Indian accent. But when you sign up for Sunday webinars, that too can become a reality. So we tend to glorify the past and how great things were. And there are other aspects of our past which we demonize completely, as these were the worst things that would happen. And these need to be fixed. And until I fix this, I cannot be happy. So between glamorizing the past and demonizing it, we are lost, which means the chance that we will begin to dance with the past is a mystery, to be able to learn new things from it, to be able to see our life from different angles is sometimes completely overcome. Another challenge that I want us to remind us about is that sometimes we start relating to aspects of our past as if they were a problem. Now, when we decide to relate to anything as if it's a problem, what does the mind do? The mind tries to find a solution. And this problem solving modality is something that even our educational systems give us. We go to school to learn problem solving techniques. What does that do? It does two things. It puts us in a compulsive tendency to start looking for problems. Notice that we are not trained by our educational system as much to be open to the world of possibilities. We are trained more often to be looking for problems and solving them. So the first casualty of this approach is that we start trying to fix problems. And then if you're just looking for problems, the principle of Kaplan's hammer that says you give a small child a hammer, it'll start looking for every nail that needs pounding. How many of us have fallen into this habit of looking for problems, because we are always looking for problems. And in the vastness of life's landscape, there are so many beautiful things. And we get distracted. We don't notice those beautiful things, things that comfort, things that enliven us, things that invigorate us. And instead, we look at that one thing that is wrong. It's like you write beautifully, and then you're so focused on that one grammatical error or spelling mistake that we made. And then the second challenge is that once you decide there's a problem, you will find a solution. Now, how often have today's solutions become tomorrow's problems? The mystics like Osho tell us that the problem-solving mindset is one in which you will identify problems and you'll implement solutions, but the solutions are themselves problems. They look like solutions in the moment, just allow a little time to pass, and it becomes a problem. In other words, if we are approaching life as a problem to be solved, we are going to be chasing our own tail, because in life, there are problems, and endless number of problems. They never seem to stop coming. And our mind will get hooked and hypnotized by these problems, trying to generate analytically and logically sound solutions. And then we have lost the experience of life. Because now, what we needed to experience life in its fullness and its grandness is to have embraced it as a mystery and danced with it. And instead, we have reduced life to a list of problems to be solved. And very often, how many of us and how often do we reduce life to a checklist? 20 things or 25 things that we need to get done. Just imagine how beautiful life is. It's the same life out of which Beethoven composed his symphonies. It's the same life from which Kabir wrote his beautiful poems and Rumi wrote his beautiful writings and all of that. So imagine what the artists, the poets, and all of them saw in this everyday life. They saw such beauty. And what has modern educational training and scientific training done to us? It has somehow, and I'm not saying that's been the intent, but it has filled us with so many analytical tools that life has become something to be analyzed, to be solved, a problem to be solved, rather than a mystery to be embraced. There's another interesting perspective, which I'm not sure how it ties in with what I'm sharing, but I was just reading it in Osho's Book of Secrets just before I started, and I said, heck, I don't care if it relates to today's topic, but it's beautiful, and I want to share it. And it comes from the Tantra tradition. It's called the this and the that. And I said, what is the this and the that? And I kept reading on. And I just read a few paragraphs. There's a whole chapter in this book called the Book of Secrets. And what I took away was still so comforting. You think you already know whatever is near to you. That is the this. Whatever is near to me is the this. Whatever is far away from me is the that. So now we have a this and a that. And Tantra is not saying it is so. It is saying that it's all one. But the mind will sometimes live in dualities, will live in bifurcations and divisions, and we will say the this and the that. Well, the this is the one that's more proximate, that is close by, and the that is very far away, somewhere in the clouds. Now, one of the unfortunate commonsensical errors we fall into is that we think we know the this. We think it's the that we need to know, not the this. It's almost like we ignore the people that are closest to us, and we will go in search of great authors and great wisdom and all of that. We will ignore the tree that is right outside your window, and you will drive to the metro parks to try to find trees and beauty in them. It is the tendency of us, many of us, in our everyday consciousness to forget about the this, which is right in front of us, and to go in pursuit of that, which is so far away. And so it is even with our attempts at psychoanalysis and all of this. We are sitting here, and instead of celebrating the this, which is the present, where life is happening, we are lost in unraveling and untangling the that, which is very far away. So Osho asks, you don't even know the tree you pass every day, do you? Do you know your friend with whom you have lived your whole life? Or do you know yourself, who is the nearest? Do you even know your breath that comes in and goes out? Look at how intimate and near that is to me. The breathing, the breath that comes in and goes out. Do I even take the time to feel and experience the breath that comes in and go out? Even this is not known, he says, so why keep hankering after that? And so many of the Eastern traditions have talked about how the mind is like a pendulum. It goes into the future, where it's either imagining dismal, abysmal scenarios or beautiful, rosy future. And then it goes into the past. It goes into the future and goes into the past. And if you see, the past and the future become our focus. And most of our time, the mind is spent thinking about those. Whereas the cosmic tragedy is that life is happening in this moment in the present, as the breath is coming in, the breath is coming out, the tree is standing just outside my door. But we miss the this for the that, you know? And part of it is to be able to come back to this moment and to be able to experience it in all of its depth and all of its beauty. Now, I also don't want us to fall into the trap of implying, as I have all this time during this presentation, that the past is the source of all problems. Remember, I want to refer to a book called an article called Purpose to Impact in the Harvard Business Review that talked about how searching for moments in the past of joy, of bliss and creativity, of going through your entire past and finding those peak moments when you found a deep sense of meaning, when the boundary between work and play collapsed. The past can be a great source of joy. And actually, looking at those times in the past when you were excited and happy, you can understand what really nourishes you, what nurtures you, and can help you find a deeper sense of purpose, and a deeper ability to make an impact in life. So the past can also be a source of great joy. Excuse me. Uh, the past is like a rose in some ways. And why do we invoke the rose? It has the flowery, petally, fragrant aspects of it, the beautiful, the redness of it, and all of that. And it has the thorny aspects. And both exist. To focus just on the beautiful, soft petals and to ignore the thorns, or to just ignore the thorns and to focus on the rose petals, would both be only a partial viewing of reality. So, what is the approach to the past? Osho would tell us that it is the third way. So, in any situation where there's a duality, the Eastern traditions talk about the third way, that is the transcendent way. That is the way of the watcher on the hills, as the Sufis call them. That is the way of the witness. That is the way of the observer. So, for example, if the past has got painful aspects and it has got some beautiful aspects, if you become too identified with all the pain, you will be languishing in pain. If you become too identified with all the beauty, you may start suppressing the pain and become one-sided. And anything that reminds you of the pain, you will run from. I know of friends who will always want to keep everything positive. When you start talking about anything that might bring us the hint of pain, they say, don't go there. I want to be positive. What has happened often in such instances is that you've exerted a tremendous amount of pressure to bury whatever is painful. Now, when you put all your energies into burying whatever is painful, the chance is that when something reminds us of what it is that we are running from, we will become destabilized. So the Eastern mystical traditions talk about the witness. Look at the thorns and look at the beautiful rose. Become the watcher of both of that. Become the watcher, the observer, the witness of the pain and the happiness and the unhappiness. If you can occupy this third position where you have the ability to watch the negative and to watch the positive and not become identified with either, then you have transcended. You have become an observer. So then the shit might hit the fan and the Browns might lose today, and you will be a watcher of the game. You will not become so depressed by it that you will have your 19th nervous breakdown, to use the title of a song by the Rolling Stones. Or if you're too exalted by it, well, enjoy it as ecstasy. But if you become too carried away by it and you lose the capacity to be the watcher, we lose perspective in life. Now, I want to share with you another metaphor that Osho describes in his book, The Book of Secrets. And I just want to hold up this book. Look at the size of the book. It's like the Random House Dictionary. It's daunting, but it's one of the most amazing books I've read by Osho. The Book of Secrets, 112 meditations to discover the mystery within. And he has got a number of meditations there to help us become unglued from the past and to be able to have a creative relationship, a generative relationship with the past. So he talks about the man who can create an orchestra out of his own being, his mind, and his heart. So what is the idea of a paradise? The idea of a paradise is it's a state of being that we are able to generate. And from the past, there are many voices inside our head. Notice that your parents said something, your brother said something, your neighbor said something, your teacher said something about you. And there are so many voices inside our head. We might think of ourselves as one, but try to hear all the voices that are playing simultaneously inside our head. And he talks about how often all of these different voices that are contradicting each other are creating, like, a very noisy restaurant, a diner that you go to where everybody's screaming at the top of their voice. Our minds often feel like that noisy diner pre-COVID days. Everyone's screaming, conflicting with each other. All these voices inside our head, they don't even agree. Somebody said you're good, somebody said you're mean, somebody said you're polite, somebody said you're rude. Everybody had a different opinion about you. And all these voices are trying to dominate us, and that is how we create hell. So there's a beautiful definition of hell that Osho has given that was so poetic. Hell is your inability to bring the crowds within you to a peaceful, loving existence. So there are crowds within us. You see a football stadium, of course, in the pre-COVID days, you see it, there's a huge crowd, but our mind is like a football stadium. There are so many experiences and there are so many voices inside that are screaming at us. And hell is our inability to bring the crowds within us to a peaceful, loving existence. And if we can create an orchestra out of the being, the mind, and the heart, we have created paradise for ourselves. And he talks about there may be 30 components of your past. Each of them is like a musical instrument. Guess who is the musical instrument, the orchestra that's playing in our head? It's of 30 chattering monkeys playing musical instrument. Can you see if there are 30 chattering monkeys trying to play their musical instrument? One is blowing on the saxophone, one is blowing on the trumpet, one is trying to play the cello, one is trying to play the drums. Can you see that all they will create is noise? And that's what happens. The transitioning to an inner harmony is to be able to start taking those very experiences and components from the past that are there, that may seem disjointed, that may seem incoherent, and arranging them in some form of music so that they all come in harmony. I want to share with us a few techniques that were there to come to a greater harmony with the past. But before that, just a few references to people who've talked about different elements of the past. How can we not do a presentation on the past without acknowledging Freud and the concept of transference? For Freud, we had significant relationships with many people in our childhood. Some of those patterns of relating And some of the emotions associated with those patterns of relating became frozen in our mind. Later in life, we might meet somebody who reminds us of that person that we related to in our childhood. And guess what? The entire pattern, the entire configuration of emotions and thoughts we had from our childhood come back. Like, for example, imagine you had a very dominating father who you feel did not understand you, who was not compassionate to you, who bossed you around. Later on, when you're 45 years old, you may have a boss who reminds you of your father. And all of a sudden, we become as disempowered as we were when we were 5 with our fathers. And we have what is called a regression or a transference. The transference is an automatic transferring of a constellation of thoughts and feelings from an earlier time in our childhood to a much later time. Often we have transferences with relation to our significant others. Some of us relate to our husbands and wives as if they were our parents, and all the issues that we had with our fathers, we end up having with our husbands or wives, and all of that. That's the idea of transference. To Alfred Adler, the one of three other member of the psychoanalytic trinity, the past is always about compensation. In our childhood, we feel a deep sense of inferiority, and the rest of our life is about trying to compensate for those inferiorities. For Jung, it is the collective unconscious. I want to share with you a few of the approaches that have been proposed about coming to terms with our past and completing the past, even if that's available. One of the approaches that Osho gives in the Book of Secrets is called the technique of rewinding. What happens in the technique of rewinding is that you go over everything at the end of the day, from the most recent to the moment you woke up. So, you start with, okay, I'm just going to bed. So you remember the fact that you're just going to bed. Then you go back to how you brushed your teeth before you came to bed. Then you go back to how you cleaned the cat litter before you came to bed. Then you go back to how you ate your dinner. Just quickly, take like a flight, a helicopter flight over the events of the day, going over everything. When you do that, you might find unfinished pieces, some pain. Somebody insulted you and there is some trapped emotion within you. It becomes an opportunity for you to at least become aware of those moments, and by becoming aware, completing those unfinished elements of your past. Now, that's the first step. You start with the day. You can do that in terms of the whole week. You can get a high-level view of your week. What was this week like from last Sunday to this Sunday? And you just go over the different days. You can even maintain a little diary so that all the days don't just collapse into one, and you just have gone over the days. After a week, you can actually extend it to a month. And in the technique of rewinding, you just go over your whole life with all the significant events that you can remember. And through this process, we will see, experiences and events that we have not fully understood or processed. And by just becoming aware of them, and it's not even that you have to analyze them and work on them, you just say, okay, I see you. Those experiences that are incomplete are waiting to be seen. And once you have just seen them with your compassionate eyes, important, compassionate eyes, not arguing eyes, not fighting eyes, compassionate eyes, you will be able to integrate them. So that's rewinding the tape. Another technique I want to briefly describe, and of course, these are techniques on which there are like 30-page chapters or 20-page chapters in this book. So for me to think that I can convey to you the fullness of the technique in a few words would be foolish, but it is just to inspire us to try different ways. Seeing the past as a dream. Observe the past, disidentify yourself from it. So what normally happens is, I think of my childhood, I'm in my childhood when I'm seeing it. When I'm thinking of my childhood, I'm being the child in that. So the pain, the shame, and whatever it is that I experienced, the disappointment is part of me. In seeing the past as a dream, what I would do is that I would start looking at the past, reviewing my childhood like it's a movie or a film that is passing on a screen. I would see it as a dream. Notice, says Osho, when you're in the middle of a dream, you don't know that you're in a dream. You need to wake up from the dream in order to know that you were in a dream. Similarly, with our past is like a dream. We are embedded in it. We are one with it. Okay, But if we can start seeing our past as a dream, so for example, take your childhood, live through your childhood, just see it as a dream that you had. Now, if we can start doing this with the past, Osho reminds us that tomorrow, when you wake up, today will seem like a dream. It will not seem like reality. It'll seem like a dream. Through this process, you start beginning to see the past as a dream. And when you can see your past as a movie or a dream, and you become the watcher outside from outside. So imagine somebody made a movie about your past life, your life up to this point, and you're watching it on a screen. You're not the actor in it, you're just watching the movie. When you can do that, you get a level of separation from from the past that enables you to be a watcher and an observer. Another technique that was you. I remember some form of it. I remember in the advanced course of the Landmark Forum, where all of us have a story about what happened to us in our childhood. Like I had an abusive mother. I had a mother, father who argued with me. They didn't see how great I was. We have a story. There is a technique I've heard where you write down that story, like maybe in a page or two, and then you find another partner who's also tormented by a story about what happened. And the two people sit down and read the story to each other 1,000 times, or read the same story to yourself 1,000 times. For example, I had a story about how my pimples, I had very severe acne, and many of you know that I used to have 300 abscesses on my face every day, during my teenage years. And I know it's almost close to the end of time, so I'll be wrapping up. Um, and I had the story that those abscesses on my face that tormented me for so many years had destroyed my self-confidence completely, and there was no way that I would be able to and be confident again in life. And that story was frozen. I wrote it out and I read it to myself 1,000 times. When I read it to myself 1,000 times, I got so tired of my story. I said, screw that. I'm tired of the story. So when the story came up, the story stood outside me. I was not being the story. Earlier, I was myself being the story. And in this instance, by writing it out on a piece of paper and reading it repeatedly, the story jumped out from the core of my being and stood outside, and I could look at it. Okay. The last technique that I want to reference is that of unsolved tears and masks. It is where you come to a place where you accept yourself unconditionally. You love yourself and accept yourself unconditionally. That session that I do is about an hour and a half to 2 hours long. If those of you are interested in it, I would encourage you to go to my YouTube channel and find the 4-hour version of Why Life Sucks I have. There is one 4-hour version of Why Life Sucks I have, which is which is perhaps the best seminar I've ever delivered in my life. I would encourage you to watch that, because there's some of these techniques like the chattering monkey, the unsolved tears, that bring us to a place where we love and accept ourselves for who we are unconditionally. And falling in love with ourselves and having that kind of self-acceptance is the ultimate healing, for everything that we've had. I want to end with a quotation by Osho. He says, paradise is not a location. Often we think of paradise as a location. He says, paradise is not a location. It is not part of geography. Paradise is a certain attitude towards existence. Paradise is a certain attitude towards existence. It is a way of life. The same energy that becomes misery can become bliss. The same energy that becomes jealousy and anger is transformed into love, into peace, and into silence. It is not a question of only the enlightened person changing the world into a paradise. Often we think we leave it to the enlightened people to change the world into a paradise. He says, no, everybody has to change it by transforming himself. You and I can change this world by transforming ourselves. And that comes from that ultimate leap of being able to accept ourselves unconditionally. And when it means accept ourselves unconditionally, it means accepting our past too for what it is unconditionally, right? And to be able to love ourselves the way we are. And if we are able to teach that in schools, not just reading, writing, and arithmetic, but also the ability to hold ourselves in unconditional love, what a great foundation it would be for a new humanity. Folks, with those words, I will be bringing down the curtain on today's presentation. If any of you are not